I hope everybody can see us now and hear us. And if you are somebody who participated in our previous webinars from the center, not necessarily our Slavic speaker series, you know that when the bells on the towers ring, it's noon and we should be starting. Starting from the beginning with the very formal welcome from the University of Florida. My name is Agata Kowalewska. I am in the faculty in the Center for European Studies. And the UF Center for the European Studies is the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence and Title VI National Research Centers for Europe. The center is housed in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and it is a multidisciplinary area of language and area studies. And there are some housekeeping rules that I would like all of us to hear about, which is, first of all, that the seminar is recorded, or it will be recorded. And after that, the recording will be posted on our website and will be also available at our YouTube channel. All participants can submit their questions either during the presentation or afterwards in a Q&A. There's a little Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen, and please use that option for submitting your questions. And what are we doing today? So today we have a first speaker in a returning series of the Slavic mythology speakers. And our first speaker is Dr. Andreas Jones, and he will talk about creation of the world according to Slavs. Dr. Jones received his PhD in Slavic linguistics and literature from the University of California, Berkeley. He has taught at the University of California, Berkeley and Santa Cruz, both campuses, and at the University of Washington in Seattle. Today, he will talk about Slavs, and he will talk about Slavs' approach to the creation of the world and duality of that understanding how the world was created. And that particular part of his research was published in an extensive article on Slavic creation, The Secret and the Comic. And that article was published in 2005. The last housekeeping rule and the reminder that after the event is completed, you will receive a survey from us. And in that survey, we ask you about evaluation of our work so we can improve what we are doing and provide more programming on this topic and other topics. And now, without me speaking anymore, I'm giving the microphone and the voice and the space to Dr. Jones.
All right, thank you. I want to thank the University of Florida and Agata Kowalewska for inviting me, and thank you all of you for attending and for your interest in Slavic folklore. I'm sure for this crowd, I have no need to remind people how important for the Slavs in their cultural history their conversion to Christianity was, and this was something that now happened a long time ago, more than 1,000 years ago. It happened at different times in different places, in Bulgaria in the 9th century, and for the Eastern Slavs in the 10th century. The Eastern Slavs are the countries that we now know as Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus. But in the 10th century, these three nations and languages had not yet developed, and the Eastern Slavs spoke more or less the same language. The name of their country was Rus, not Russia, but Rus, and the capital was at Kiev. And so the country and this period in history are sometimes referred to as Kievan Rus. The ruler of Rus in the late 10th century was Prince Vladimir, and he was baptized around the year 987, 988, and then, of course, the people were expected to follow his example. But of course, this can't happen overnight if you just think of the logistics of this very large country and a large population. This is not going to happen quickly. And of course, the Slavs already had a religion. They had religious beliefs in gods and spirits and customs. And these traditional beliefs of theirs, pagan or pre-Christian beliefs, also didn't just disappear, even though they were discouraged and sometimes persecuted. So what we find in folklore many centuries later is that there are many elements of the pagan, some elements of pagan and pre-Christian customs and beliefs are combined or blended with Christian beliefs in a kind of synthesis or syncretism. And this is not just the case with the Slavs, but with many other, I think there are many other times and places in history when a whole people convert to a new religion, their old religion doesn't just disappear, but it continues in various ways. One example later, we'll look at a narrative where the prophet and Saint Elijah shakes clouds and causes thunder. And this is a role that he probably took over from a Slavic god whose name was Perun. When they converted to Christianity, the Slavs, of course, they were instructed in the doctrines of the Christian faith and Christian dogma, but they also received many stories, many narratives from the Bible and from Apocrypha. Of course, most important, really stories about the life of Christ, but also stories from the book of Genesis, about the creation of the world, about the creation of human beings, Adam and Eve, the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, the flood, Noah's Ark, etc. So if you imagine for people hearing these stories for the first time, it must have been very interesting. It might have seemed strange. It certainly gave them food for thought and speculation and fantasy. And so what we find in Slavic folklore and many other folklore traditions is that stories from the Bible are retold and kind of reimagined in creative ways, reinterpreted and given interesting new twists, so we end up with sort of interesting new versions of the Bible or alternative versions. So there are many, in Slavic folklore, there are many narratives about the creation of the earth, human beings, Adam and Eve, and how, about different plants and animals. But in this talk today, I want to focus on the creation of just the earth itself. And there are many narratives in Slavic folklore about the creation of the earth, and it's a big field. I'm only going to look at a subset of these narratives. And in the group that I'm looking at, there are two elements that really stand out as interesting and different. And right away you say, gee, this is not from the Bible. This is not the standard Christian version. It must come from somewhere else and be older than the conversion to Christianity. The first element is that it's not God who creates the earth, but God and the devil. And there's a kind of cooperation and at the same time competition and rivalry between God and the devil to create the earth. The second element is that in the very beginning, there's nothing but a vast ocean, a primordial ocean, and God has the devil dive into the bottom of the sea and bring up earth or sand, and it's this earth or sand that is used to create the world. All right, if we'd have the next slide. I want to just also a short note on what do we call these narratives. I want to, for the sake of clarity, use narratives that terms that were proposed by an American anthropologist and folklorist, William Bascom, where he proposed that you use the word myth to refer to a prose narrative that people accepted as being true and that accounted for the origin of the world, the origin of mankind, the origin of death, the characteristics of birds, animals, geographical features, and natural phenomena. Legends, he suggested, could be a term for also prose narratives accepted as being true, but set in a period much closer to us in time and when the world was the way it is today. And folk tales as narratives, prose narratives that are recognized as fiction and often told for entertainment, so fairy tales. So these are kind of ideal categories. And I think if you study folklore, oral traditions, you find very often that you come across texts and or songs, etc., that don't fit easily into one of these categories. And as so often in life, things don't fit into easy categories. But I think just for the sake of clarity, I will use these terms. People often use the word myth and mythology in sort of a vague way. But if I say myth today in this talk, I mean it in this sense that William Bascom has suggested. All right, another American folklorist who liked to put things into categories was Stiff Thompson. He created a multi-volume reference work called the Motif Index of Folk Literature, and he's basically took motifs or individual details from folklore and arranged them, put them in categories and gave them all numbers. And this character, the devil, or we'll also see it can be a bird or another character who dives into the earth, he gave the name Earth Diver, and this name has stuck. And so if you are interested in the subject and read more about it, you'll find that in the English language literature, it's referred to it as both a character and a narrative, as the Earth Diver character and the Earth Diver myth or the Earth Diver narrative. All right, with that introduction, let's look at some of the narratives. The first I want to read two versions, two creation narratives first from Ukraine. And the first two were published in 1876 in a collection of Ukrainian folk tales and legends, edited and collected by Mikhailo Drahomanov. He was a historian and an ethnographer. And he also published an important study of the subject of the creation narratives in the 1890s. So here's the first one. When the Lord thought to create the world, he spoke to the eldest angel, Satanael. Of course, Satanael is Satan. Well, my archangel, let's go create the world. Let's go, God, said Satanael. So they went over the sea, and the sea was dark, it is said, an abyss. Then God said to Satanael, do you see that abyss? I see it, God. Go into that abyss, he said, to the very bottom, and get me a handful of sand. When you take it, he said, make sure you say to yourself, I take you, earth, in the name of the Lord. Very well, God. Satanael dove into the abyss down to the very sand and became very angry. Well, he said, God, I'm going to add my own name. May it be both yours and mine. He took the sand and said, I take you, earth, in the Lord's name and my own. That's what he said. He had to carry it up, and the water washed the sand away. He clenched his hand together, but how could you fool God? When he came up from the sea, the sand was gone. The water had washed it away. Don't try to be crafty, Satanael, said the Lord. Go again, and don't add your name. Satanael went again, but the devil is the devil. And again he said, I take you, earth, in the Lord's name and my own. And again the sand was gone. Finally, the third time, Satanael said, I take you, earth, in the name of the Lord. This time he carried it and did not clench his fist. He carried the sand on the palm of his hand so that the water would wash it away, but in vain. The whole handful that he gathered was what he brought up to God. God took the sand, walked about the sea, and scattered it. Satanael licked his hand. He thought, I'll keep at least a little bit for myself, and then I will create earth. The Lord had scattered the sand. Well, Satanael, is there no more sand? There is no more, God. Well, then it must be blessed, said the Lord. And he blessed the earth in all four parts, and when he had blessed it, the earth began to grow. The earth grew, and also the earth that Satanael kept in his mouth. It kept growing until it forced his lips open. God said, spit, Satanael, and he began to spit and spew. Where he spat, mountains grew up, and where he spewed, rocks. And that is why our earth is not even. They say that God knows how long those rocks and mountains would have kept growing, but Peter and Paul cursed them so that they stopped growing. Then the Lord said to Satanael, now, Satanael, all we need to do is consecrate the earth, but let's let it grow for a while, and we'll have a rest. Very well, God, said Satanael. They lay down to rest. God slept, and Satanael thought he would drown God in order to take the earth for himself. He picked him up and ran to the sea. First he ran and ran to the south, but there was no sea. He rushed to the north, but there was none to be seen there either. He wore himself out, running to all four parts of the world. Nowhere was there a sea. Of course, the earth had already grown so much that its edges pushed against the sky, so where could one expect to find the sea? He saw that he could do nothing about this, so he carried God back to the same place and lay down next to him. After he lay there for a while, he woke God up. Get up, God, he said, to consecrate the earth. God said to him, don't worry, Satanael, my earth is consecrated. I consecrated it last night in all four quarters. So you see what happened is the devil, without realizing it, he ran to he carrying God, trying to drown God. He runs to the south, he runs to the north, he runs to the east, he runs to the west, without realizing he's made the sign of the cross over the earth and blessed it, sort of against his own best interest, I suppose. All right, a second Ukrainian narrative. The devil competed with God. The devil said, I will make an earth like the one you made. I'll make the same thing. What I want to do, that's what I'll do. That's what the devil said. So the devil set to making the earth. He dove into the sea, down to the very bottom, grabbed earth into his mouth, and swam up with that earth. But the sea is deep. By the time he came up to the surface, the water washed the earth out of his mouth. He couldn't bring any earth up with him. No matter what the devil did, nothing helped. When he dove up from the sea, the water washed the earth out of his mouth. Then the devil went to God. He said to God, this is what happens to me. I can't manage to bring earth up from the sea. Well, said the Lord, when you carry earth up from the sea, you should say, Lord, bless. The devil said, Lord, bless, dove to the bottom of the sea, gathered earth and brought it up to the surface. This earth became mountains and stones. What God created was even and pure, but what the devil created was only stones and mountains and all kinds of bends and twists. That was the kind of thing the devil made. And so it was with everything that the devil made. The devil competed with God. God sowed oats and got oats, but when the devil sowed oats, he grew thistles. God created a cow and it became a cow, but when the devil wanted to make a cow, it turned out as a goat. That's what happened with the devil. All right. Next, another Ukrainian narrative. This was an archival recording, which I believe was first published in the 1990s. Long ago, when there was not yet any earth, there was water everywhere. We did not exist either. The devil was already living, but who knows where he lived. God came to the devil and led him to the Dnipro River so that he would dive and bring back sand in his hand. He dove but could not bring anything up. The water washed it away. He gathered sand and the water washed it out of his hand. God took him to where the water was shallower, and the devil brought sand from there. God scattered it about the water, and dry land appeared, and the world appeared. Old people say that that's what happened. All right, in this last narrative, I think in your rational college-educated mind, you're probably going to say, "Wait a minute, there's an inconsistency here. It doesn't quite make sense." You just said there's no land, there's water everywhere, and yet God takes the devil to the Dnipro or the Dnieper River. How could there be a river when there's no land? And so I think you find this in studying folklore and oral traditions, is that you come across instances like this where it's easy, inconsistencies. You say there's really this looks like a mistake. I think what we need to do is sort of step back for a moment and just sort of and not judge this right away, but instead maybe ask ourselves, well, does it tell you anything? Does this inconsistency tell us anything? And I think in this case, what it tells us is that something about the narrator and the audience, the storyteller, is that this is a narrative about the creation of the world, but at the same time, it very quickly the focus is on the world that's important to us, that's in front of us, and it's and that for these people, the Dnipro River really is kind of the center of the world for them. All right, I'll have another narrative, and this one is from northern Russia. There was a time when there was neither earth nor heaven, and there was only water. Sabaoth came down to the earth and asked, "Who is here?" Satan answered and said, "I am here." Sabaoth asked Satan, "Is there earth anywhere? Have you seen any?" "There is at the bottom of the sea," answered Satan. "Go down to the bottom of the sea and get some earth." Satan turned into a golden eye duck, dove down to the bottom of the sea, and filled his mouth with earth. But while he was coming up from there, the water washed the earth away, and he came up with nothing. Sabaoth sent him a second time, but the second time the same thing happened. Satan was ashamed, and Sabaoth reproached him and said, "Brother, you are weak. Go a third time, and on the bottom of the sea you will see an icon of a virgin with a child standing on a stone. Cross yourself before the child, and then take the earth." Satan dove a third time, did what Sabaoth had commanded him to, and brought earth. Sabaoth took this earth and scattered it in the east, and a wondrous, marvelous land appeared. Sabaoth asked Satan, "Is that all the earth there is?" "That is all," said Satan, but he kept a little bit in his cheek. The earth in his cheek began to grow and increase, and his cheeks began to swell. Satan saw that he could not deceive Sabaoth. He took this earth and scattered it in the north, and there a cold, stony, and infertile land appeared. All right, the next narrative is from Belarus, and this is from the Minsk region, and it was recorded sometime between 1890 and 1907. "You can see what a thicket there is here, how bad smelling. You could walk for a whole week and not reach the end of it. Long ago, there was clear water here. It sparkled and shone in the sun like glass. God rode on the water in a small boat and looked around to see where to make the earth. So once God was sailing in a boat and thinking about how and where to put water, and at that time the devil noticed God and swam after him, without losing sight of him. He swam up to the boat and, out of fear, dove back into the water like a diving bird and swam again. He very much wanted to find out what God was going to do. God saw that the devil was on his trail like a shadow. He saw it but didn't say anything. So God scattered earth. He strewed a handful of earth, and immediately the water parted and dry land came forth with forest, field, and meadow. The devil looked on and was just amazed at where all this came from. So God sailed and scattered the seeds from the boat as if from a basket. The devil looked at this and thought, "Well, if I could get those seeds, I would do better than God. I would make something so that Lucifer himself would be envious." God saw the devil's thoughts and allowed him to take some of the seeds. Then God turned the boat around and ran right into the devil. The devil writhed in pain. He wanted to slip away into the water, but his tail got caught in some weeds, and he twisted around in the whirlpool like an eel. At the same time, God turned around and the boat sailed right by the devil. The devil writhed in pain because God's boat had scraped his side. But at that moment, he grabbed a handful of seeds from the boat, and so that God wouldn't see it and take them away, he quickly tossed the seeds down his throat and swallowed them. God sailed on as if he had not noticed this. The devil was glad and rushed aside from joy to get away from God. But then the devil saw that his belly was expanding like yeast until his sides were going to burst. His belly grew larger and larger. It grew so that the devil couldn't breathe. So he started puking and spitting out those seeds. Crooked stumps or clusters of vines grew up where the devil spat. The devil pushed on across the water and was puking so hard that his insides were coming out. And all the while, more and more of the devil's vines were being spit out on the water. The devil was sick to his stomach. He wanted to get all the seeds out of his stomach, and he scurried about on the water like a spider and kept puking. After some time, the water was all covered with vines and brittle willow. The devil got caught on some vines, and when he spewed, all the seeds came out of his stomach into the water, and all kinds of useless grasses grew from them. The devil defiled the clear water and turned it into a foul devil's marsh. All right, in this version, you might have noticed that the diving episode is missing. There's no diving for Earth to create the world, but all the other recognizable elements, the primeval ocean, and then this rivalry of God and the devil. God creates the world, and the devil wants to imitate him, but fails. And also, there's an inconsistency you might have noticed, is that first God is scattering earth to create the water, and then the earth turns into seeds, and that's not explained. I mean, it makes sense, the idea that you would have seeds and seeds will grow into something, but that shift from earth to seeds is not explained. So another inconsistency that in sort of a rational, we might say, well, it's a mistake, but I think we just sort of accept and take it for what it is, I guess. All right, finally, a last version, and this is from Ukraine, the Carpathian mountain region, which is called Hutsulshchina, and the people who live there also are called the Hutsuls, and this was published in 1908. And in this version, the cast of characters is God, Satan or the devil, who's called Aridnik, and Elijah, who's called Ale. In the beginning, there was only water upon which God was walking around, and clouds upon which the Spirit of God, Ale, or Elijah, was sleeping. Foam was floating on one spot on the still water. God endowed the foam with life and strength, and thus Aridnik, or Satan, God's companion, arose from it. Upon God's command, Aridnik brought forth a little clay out of the depths of the sea under his fingernail, from which God made a tiny earth to serve both of them as a resting place. Upon this, God lay down and fell asleep. Aridnik, however, desiring to be the ruler of the world, decided to throw the sleeping God into the water. He began pushing him, but in whatever direction he pushed him, the earth grew. When the earth, growing larger, took on its present size, God awoke, and becoming aware of the trick, threw Aridnik into the water, which immediately froze. Aridnik knocked his head against the ice, broke through it, and got back up on the earth. From that time, God did not call him his friend, but his enemy. After some time, Ale awoke, and noticing the earth, became frightened, and shook the cloud so much that he couldn't manage to stay on them, and fell to the earth with such force that it bent, forming mountains and valleys. In order to prevent Ale from causing another such catastrophe, God chained one of his hands to a rock, so that he can only shake the clouds and cause thunder with one hand, and thus the form of the earth can no longer change. All right, so I hope these are 6 versions of this creation narrative from the Eastern Slavs, and I think this gives you some idea of the nature of oral narrative and folklore traditions. So you have a basic narrative idea or a basic narrative framework, and then different storytellers, different narrators they retell, they develop this, they elaborate, and they embroider upon this, obviously within certain limits. But what you end up with is, over space and over time, is many, many variations, many different versions of a single narrative. And so a key feature of oral traditions is this kind of variability in the existence of many versions. And one thing that affected this, you could say, if you are interested in these narratives and you want to have a good understanding, a good grasp of them, is that you can't really just look at 1 or 2 versions, or even just 5 or 6, as we just did, but you really have to look at as many as you possibly can in a single tradition area. So fortunately for us, for the Eastern Slavic versions of this narrative, this work has been done by a Russian researcher, Vera Kuznetsova, who's done a very impressive and thorough study. She looked at more than 300 texts, and of those, about 104 included the diving episode, the Earth Diver. She was also looking at narratives that included other episodes that we haven't heard in the ones I read. So besides the creation of the earth, sometimes these narratives continue with the creation of angels and demons, the banishment of Satan, and the creation of Adam. So in a nutshell, sort of her Kuznetsova's conclusions is she found there were 2 large variants of this creation myth. A northern variant, or a northern subtype, in Russia, in Belarus, and Siberia. And by Siberia, she means Russian people living in Siberia, not the indigenous people of Siberia. And in the northern variant, characteristics of this variant is that there's a bird diver, a bird who dives into the primeval ocean. She finds a more clearly expressed dualism, and the diving episode is developed in more detail. And also there's an episode in some of the northern versions which she thought might be borrowed from, or might have come from Finno-Ugric folk tradition. Satan once, when the earth was created, the devil asked God for land, and he says, give me half of the earth. No. Give me a quarter of the earth. No. Give me an eighth of the earth. No. And God finally gives the devil just enough land to plant a stick or a staff. And then when that stick is pulled out, snakes and toads, insects, undesirable animals emerge from that hole. All right. So that was the northern variant. The southern variant, which is found in Ukraine, the diver does not appear in bird form, and the episode of the creation of land is developed to a greater extent. There's also in many of the southern versions a stable verbal formula where the devil says when he gathers earth at the bottom of the sea, not I take this, but God. So usually, and this is like in the versions we looked at, usually there are two times where the devil doesn't say this. He says, I take this, not God, and then he fails, and then finally when he says the right thing, he's able to bring the earth up. In some of the southern versions, the devil sleeps while God creates the land. And then in many of them, as we've seen, the devil tries to unsuccessfully drown God while God is sleeping, and the earth simply grows in front of Satan as he carries or pushes God. And then some of the southern versions also include an episode which also exists as an independent narrative where God has to seize or retrieve a valuable object from the devil and sends an angel to do this. And we'll say more about that in a moment. In her study, Kuznetsova also looks at a written text, an apocryphal text called the Tiberian Sea. And this is a text, there are about, I think, at least 20 text manuscript copies of this text, most of them in Russia. But the people scholars who study these apocrypha are really not in agreement about where this text was composed and when. Some believe that it was composed in Bulgaria in sort of the 11th to the 13th centuries. Kuznetsova and others argue that it was composed in Russia and later in the 16th to 17th centuries. I think what's most interesting for us is that this text includes the diving episode. Now, the devil dives into the primeval ocean is called the Tiberian Sea. The devil dives into the Tiberian Sea in the form of a duck, brings up earth and flint. God creates the world from earth and sand, and then breaks the flint in two and gives what's in his left hand to the devil and keeps what is in his right hand for himself. And then there continues with creation of other things. There's also an episode later in the Tiberian Sea, which is interesting because it also appears in folklore. And this is after Adam and Eve are driven from the Garden of Eden. Adam starts to plow the land. Satan comes and says that the earth belongs to him, and that in order to plow the land, Adam has to sort of sign a contract, write out a bill or a receipt, and give himself and all his descendants to the devil. And then this contract is sort of finally annulled, you could say, by the coming of Christ. So I think the scholars who've studied the Tiberian Sea text don't agree about when and where it was composed, but I think most of them probably would concede that the diving episode probably came from oral tradition. It didn't come from another literary source. And so this is, if that is the case, I think it's an interesting instance where oral literature has influenced written literature rather than the other way around. All right, there's another, we can go on to the next slide. There's another interesting written source, another document of interest to us. And this is an account that is in an important historical document of the Eastern Slavs. And this is the Povest Временных лет, the tale of bygone years. It's also referred to as the primary chronicle. And there's an image there of actually not a facsimile copy of one of the manuscripts. It gives you an idea of what one of the manuscripts looks like. And this is a chronicle that reports on events in Kiev and Rus in the 9th through the 12th centuries. And there's some interesting entries for the year 1071. The chronicle reports on the activities of people who are called Volkhui. And this is a word that could be translated as magicians or sorcerers, but in fact, probably just meant people who are practitioners of the Slavic pagan religion. Okay, next slide, please. In the year 1071, the chronicle reports that an official who is a military official and a tax collector named Jan Vrushatich was traveling in an area of now northern Russia called Belozersk, and he encountered groups of pagan people. And this is a wonderful painting from 1912 by an artist who specialized in historical subjects. And this is how he imagined this meeting of Vrushatich and the pagans. You can see Jan Vrushatich is there in the orange cloak. Obviously, he was a high status individual, so he's very well dressed in the fashion and style of his time. Behind him, there's a priest holding up a cross, and then on the right is this group of pagans, the pagan Slavs. And you might be, this painting could be a bit misleading. You might look at this and say, well, this is like this meeting of these people. It's maybe not very friendly, but at least it looks polite. But if you read the chronicle, you find out that it ended up very badly for the pagans. They ended up being killed. So they came to a bad end. But before that happened, Vušatić did ask them about their religious beliefs. He asked them about their religion and of course argued with them and told, your beliefs are false. But among other things, they told him their version of the creation of human beings. They said, we know how man was created. He asked how. They answered, God was bathing in the bathhouse and sweated. He wiped himself with a rag and threw it down from heaven onto the earth. And Satan quarreled with God about which of them should create man out of it. And the devil created man, and God put a soul in him. And that is why if a person dies, his body goes into the earth and his soul to God. So this is a very interesting written document. And we have to, I guess, approach it with a little bit of caution because, of course, the Chronicle was composed by people who were Christian monks. And so they had obviously a very negative view of the pagan religion. And they wanted to, if they write about it, portray it in a very negative light. So they might not be, 100% credible witnesses, perhaps, or reliable witnesses. Nevertheless, I think this is a very interesting piece of evidence. It certainly, even if it's inaccurate in some ways, it certainly suggests that this kind of dualistic narrative about creation, in this case, the creation of human beings, was circulating among the Eastern Slavs in the 11th century. And then it kind of gives us a point that we know, you could say, well, at the very latest, by the 11th century, these narratives were in circulation, but of course they could be centuries older. And so far we've been looking at the East Slavic folklore, but this earth diver narrative is also found other places. Versions of the earth diver creation narrative similar to the ones I've read have also been found, for example, in Finland and Estonia in the Baltic region. But what's interesting is not really among the Western Slavs. There are a few narratives that have to do with God and the devil and the creation of the world, but they lack the diving episode. So, for example, there's a Slovak folk narrative where God is flying through the sky, carrying earth in an apron. He scatters the earth and creates fertile land, and then the devil tears the apron and stones fall out of it, and this creates the Tatra Mountains. So that's where the Tatra Mountains come from. And the folklorist who published this, Pavel Dobshinsky, he mentioned that, well, this story is told in kind of a joking way, a humorous way. It was not really taken too seriously. But I think this is one of the interesting, there are many unanswered questions about these narratives. And for me, one of the interesting questions is the question of tradition boundaries. Why did the earth diver narrative not move further west? This scholar, Drahomanov, I mentioned, in his study of this, you could say he blames the Catholic Church. He says in his study, it is obvious that the Catholic clerical influence prevented the spread of the dualistic legends to the west of the Russian region. And I think, I would say he's right, but I think in a way that's too simple. It's too easy an answer. I think certainly, yes, the Catholic Church or the Western Church is one factor, but I'm sure there must be other factors as well, historical or social or psychological, that would explain why this type of narrative didn't move further west from there. However, it did move south. The earth diver narrative is found in Hungary. There are Hungarian and in Romania. In Romanian versions of this, we don't have time to look at them. In the South Slavic areas, it's a slightly different picture. There is one Slovenian folk narrative about God waking up after sleeping for many ages, going down into a primeval ocean, and when he comes up, a grain of sand remains under one of his fingernails. That grain falls out onto the surface of the sea, and that is our Earth. Otherwise, it's not found in Serbia or Bosnia or Croatia, but in a few Bulgarian versions. So I'll just quickly mention, one of the Bulgarian versions is very much like the Ukrainian version I read earlier, where the devil brings up earth from the sea. He tries to drown God while God is sleeping, and then the devil ends up making the sign of the cross. Anyway, so that happens in this Bulgarian version. Then the devil gets angry and runs away. But then the Lord did not know how to stop the earth from growing. First, the Lord creates angels to go to ask the devil what to do. They go, but they laugh at the devil, I think, because of his appearance, and the devil leaves. Then the Lord creates a bee and sends it on the same errand. The bee goes and sits on the devil's shoulder, and he overhears the devil remark on how stupid the Lord is. All he needs to do is to take a stick, make the sign of the cross in the 4 directions, and tell the earth, okay, that's enough. So the bee buzzes and flies away. The devil hears this buzzing and gets angry and curses the bee and says, "May the one who sent you eat your excrement." So the bee flies away and tells the Lord what he learned from the devil and what the Lord needs to do. The Lord stops the earth from growing, and then the Lord declares there will be nothing sweeter than the bee's excrement. So that's why honey is sweet. All right. And another Bulgarian version, another Bulgarian narrative in this version, the Lord and the devil are walking about heaven and they want to sit down. The devil says he'll go down to the bottom of the sea and brings up something hard for them to sit on. The piece of earth that the devil brings up is washed away, but the earth from under his fingernails is enough for God to create some land. The devil tries to pull away the land from under God, and the earth expands until the sky can no longer cover it. The animals are called together to give advice, and a hedgehog tells God to gather the earth together in some places and to stamp it down in others. In that way, the sky can cover the earth, and mountains and valleys are formed. So it was the hedgehog who saved the day. The bee and the hedgehog are very important animals. And there are other Bulgarian creation myths which also feature the antagonism of God and the devil, but they don't include the earth diver element. All right, next slide, please. The earth diver myth or the earth diver narrative appears in another very interesting place in Slavic folklore in a small number of Christmas carols and in a very limited geographic area of the Western Ukraine and Southeastern Poland called Galicia. And these images on the left are some carolers from Belarus in the early 20th century, and the image on the right are carolers in Russia in recently in our century, the 21st century. So this is a very interesting phenomenon. I'm only aware, this is very limited. I only know of 10 versions of this carol or carols, that sort of this group of Christmas carols. I only know of 10 of them that have been published. And in most of them, the situation is a primeval ocean, and there's usually a tree or trees and birds on the tree, 3 birds. They dive down and bring up earth, or they bring up other material to create the world, or just the different elements of the world. There's no devil and there's no antagonism, although in one of the carols, there's a certain element of opposition because the divers are not birds in that version, but they are the Lord, St. Peter, and St. Paul. The Lord tells St. Peter to dive into the sea and to bring back yellow sand and to use this to create heaven and earth. Peter is not able to dive all the way to the bottom. Paul also fails, and finally the Lord himself dives down to the bottom of the sea and creates the world. So it's an interesting question. Why would people sing a Christmas carol about the creation of the world? To just make a quick answer, I think there's something, what's perhaps going on here is there's something like an analogy, maybe not as a conscious idea, but an analogy between the beginning of the world and the beginning of the cycle of the year. This tradition of Christmas carols, I think among the Slavs, and I think for most peoples in Europe, it's generally recognized as something that's older than Christianity. It was probably something that a custom that existed already and was associated with the winter solstice. And then when Christianity came, it was sort of then associated with Christmas. And so the winter solstice, like the summer solstice, it's a special time. There are special rituals and customs and beliefs about that time. And it's possible that in the past, this caroling or ritual songs for Christianity had a magic function. The Slavic Christmas carols, of course, many of them today or in the recent past are about Christian themes, the Nativity of Christ. But there are also others that are about other themes. Many of them are, for example, songs of praise, praising the household and saying how wealthy the master of the house is, or how wealthy these people in the household are. And these could represent just your good wishes for the people in the household, but it's also possible that in the past, people believed that, well, this is a special time of the year, and the words in this song would have a magic power to bring about what you want, which is health and wealth for these people. Another suggestion by other folklorists who look at Slavic carols is that there might be a connection to an ancestor cult and a belief that there might have been a belief, for example, that at this time of year, the ancestors can return to Earth. And of course, they're in the other world and they're in a position to help us in this world. And it might also explain why the carolers sometimes wear costumes and masks. It might have been, the idea might have been that the ancestors are returning to Earth. But again, what would be the motivation for singing about the creation of the world? I think one possibility is that, again, this is a special moment of the year. It's like, in some ways, it's like the beginning of the year, and you have a unique opportunity here to sort of reset things, to recreate the world, to reorder things in a better way, and sort of create a better version of the world that you live in. But anyway, this remains an open question, and I think I hope there will be more research on this in the future, and perhaps we'll come to a better answer about that. And also an answer to the question of why we have this very interesting to me, limited phenomenon in Slavic folklore in a small area, and is it something that was always limited to this small area, or in the past, perhaps was it more widespread, and now we only find it in this area of Ukraine and Poland? All right, next slide, please. Next, I want to look at a group of narratives which I believe are related to the Earth Diver, and which, for lack of a better title, we could call these narratives retrieving a valuable object from the devil. And I mentioned them earlier in connection with Kuznetsov's study. The basic elements of this narrative are that the devil possesses or has stolen a valuable object, and could be a number of different things, such as the sun, or the contract, the receipt for human souls. And so an angel is sent to retrieve this object. There's a diving episode, which is sometimes a kind of competition between the angel and the devil. In order to impede the devil, there's a freezing of the sea to keep the devil from getting after the angel. The devil breaks his way through and then pursues the angel. And as the angel is returning to heaven and to God, the devil tears a piece of flesh from the angel's foot. And this explains why we have hollow soles, or why we have arched feet rather than flat feet. And this narrative is found in Ukraine, in Romania, and in the South Slavic areas. There's also at least one Hungarian language version that was published recently by a Hungarian scholar who's looked at these narratives, Ilona Nagy. And I think my own hunch, or I'd say my own educated guess, is that this narrative derived from the Earth Diver narrative, because you have three significant sort of similar elements. There's an antagonism of God and the devil, or in this case, it's a representative of God, the angel. There's a diving episode. And finally, there is the creation of the origin of something, not the origin of the earth, but the origin of a feature of human humanity. So I think the fact that in the same area you have this narrative with three similar elements, to me, is a strong suggestion that they are related, or that this derived from the Earth Diver narrative. I think the scenario that would explain this is perhaps that as the Earth Diver narrative moved sort of south and west through Ukraine, this valuable object narrative was born or developed, and it also spread south and west into the areas where it's now been found in Romania and in South Slavic areas. And South Slavic, it's interesting in the South Slavic areas that this narrative is found, for example, in Serbia and Bosnia, whereas the Earth Diver has not been recorded in Serbia and Bosnia. So I'm hoping that in the future, there will be more research by scholars in all of these narratives in Southeastern Europe, and just more, so we will have a fuller picture of all these narratives, their motifs, and the relationships among them for this area of Hungary, Romania, and the South Slavic countries. All right, I just want to give quickly, let's look at this narrative, a few examples. One from Ukraine. In this narrative, the devil has stolen God's heavenly power. The interesting thing is that the collector who wrote down this narrative asked the storyteller, what is the heavenly power? And they weren't really able to explain it. They're just the heavenly power. So God needs to retrieve this. He sends the archangel Michael, who asks the devil if he knows the breadth of the world and the depth of the sea. The devil knows the breadth and height of the world, but he's forgotten how deep the sea is. So he dives down, and God covers the sea with ice. By the time the devil breaks through the ice, Michael has gotten away from him, and he strikes him with the heavenly power. All right. Then a narrative from Bulgaria. The devil arises out of God's shadow, and the devil suggests that they divide the world and human beings between them. The devil will take the earth and the dead, and God will take heaven and the living. The devil asks God for a receipt. And then later, when Adam and Eve are plowing, the devil drives them away, saying that the land is his. God regrets his agreement with the devil, and he asks his angel for advice, how to get this receipt back from the devil. The angel appears to the devil in human form and serves him. One day they come to a lake, and the angel challenges the devil to dive to the bottom and get a handful of sand. First, the angel dives and quickly retrieves sand. The devil undresses and dives, but while he's in the water, he remembers that he left the receipt in the pocket of his shirt. Halfway to the bottom, he returns to the surface, and then this repeats 3 times. When he finally is reassured that the angel has not taken the receipt, he dives to the bottom. But because the devil is heavy, it takes him longer than the angel to return to the surface. And in the meantime, the angel has taken the receipt and rushed up to heaven. The devil chases after him and manages to tear a piece of flesh from the sole of his foot. And when the angel brings the receipt to God and complains about his injured foot, God consoles him and tells him that from now on, all people will have a hollow in the soles of their feet. All right, next slide, please. A name that you should be aware of in the study of Slavic folklore is Vuk Karadžić. He was a linguist and folklorist of the 19th century. As a linguist, he did very important work in helping to establish a modern standard written Serbian language. And as a folklorist, he collected and published a great deal of folklore, folk songs, and folk tales, among many other publications. He recalled hearing this narrative as a child, the valuable object narrative. The version that he recalled as a child, the devils steal the sun when they turn away from God and come down to the earth. The devil Tsar, or the devil king, sticks the sun on his spear, and the earth complains to God that the sun is going to burn it up. God sends his archangel to retrieve the son. The angel goes and befriends the devil, but of course the devil knows what the angel is up to. They come to the sea and go swimming. The devil plants his spear in the ground. The angel suggests that they should see who can dive deeper. The angel dives first and brings up sand in his teeth. Before the devil dives, he spits and creates a magpie to guard the sun. While he dives for sand, the angel makes the sign of the cross over the sea and covers it with a thick layer of ice. The devil hears the magpie cry out. He comes up and sees that, his path is barred by the ice. He dives down again for a stone to break through the ice and pursues the angel. Just as the angel has one foot in heaven, the devil tears a large piece of flesh from the sole of his other foot. The angel arrives with the son before God, but injured. And God tells the angel not to fear, that from now on all people will have hollow soles on both feet, and so it has remained to this day. All right. So we've been looking at these narratives. This narrative, which I believe is derived from Earth Diver. Not everyone agrees. That's just not the view of, for example, Kuznetsova or Romanov both believe that it was a separate phenomenon, but I believe it's derived from Earth Diver. And we've been looking at the Slavic versions of Earth Diver, Eastern European versions of Earth Diver. But the Earth Diver myth is actually distributed over a much wider area. It's found across Siberia and into native North America. So next slide, please. Just very quickly, a few versions from Siberia. The Mansi people have a creation myth with two birds, a loon and a razorbill. They both try to dive down and at first are not able to bring up any earth, but together they dive 3 times, and the third time they reach the bottom and bring up earth, and that becomes the world. The Nenets people have one myth with an ermine and a loon living on the primeval waters. The loon dives down and after 7 weeks brings up one little stone and a tiny bit of earth. The ermine tells the loon to go to sleep and don't look in this direction. So the loon goes to sleep, and then when it wakes up a little later, the water has gone and the earth has appeared. Another Nenets myth, there's a dog and a razorbill. The razorbill dives down, is gone for 3 days, and brings up small bits of grass, and these grow into our earth. The Altai people have a creation myth, which is very much like some of the Slavic versions we've seen. God and another person, who's later given the name Erlich, are flying around the world as geese. God sends the other person to bring up earth, and he keeps some of the earth in his mouth for himself. And the same thing happens. So the earth expands, and he spits out the earth, and it turns into swampy ground. The Ket people have a myth where a shaman named Do orders a loon to dive down into the primeval waters, and the loon brings up mud, and the shaman creates an island in the sea. The Evenki people, there's a myth with 2 brothers. The younger brother is the master of the upper world, and the older is the master of the lower world. The younger brother has a loon dive into the sea for earth, but the loon fails. A golden eye succeeds, and the younger brother creates the earth and rests on it. The older brother tries to steal the earth by pulling it out from under his sleeping brother, but the earth just keeps growing. So that also sounds familiar. Next slide, please. The Earth Diver myth is also found in North America, and here just quickly, just a few versions. There are many, many more. The Crow people in Montana and Wyoming have myths where in one old man coyote sends several different diving birds into the sea, the primeval ocean, who fail, and then finally the hell diver is able to bring up mud or earth, and the sun takes this earth, and while traveling west, creates the earth. In another Crow narrative, old man coyote creates the earth, which ducks bring up from the primeval sea. The Chippewa or Ojibwe people in Wisconsin have a narrative where the earth is created by a trickster or a culture hero named Winnebago. He sends an otter, a beaver, and a muskrat to dive down into the primeval sea. The muskrat manages to bring up 5 grains of earth, and with those grains of earth, Winnebago creates the world. And here in my home state of California, 2 myths that I'm fond of from the Yokuts people. In one of them, there's a rivalry between eagle and cougar. A number of ducks die while trying to retrieve earth from the primeval ocean. A turtle manages to bring up a few grains of earth. The dove brings this to the eagle, and the eagle creates the world. And finally, another Yokuts narrative, there's a rivalry of the hawk and the crow. The duck brings up mud from the primeval ocean, and the hawk and the crow create the mountains, which are the 2 major mountain ranges here in California, the Coastal Range and the Sierra Nevada Mountains. So looking at all this very vast expanse of the Earth Diver myth, I think there's a consensus among folklorists and scholars now, perhaps there wasn't in the 19th century, that the point of origin of Earth Diver is probably somewhere in Siberia, and that from that point, this narrative moved west and eventually reached the Slavs in Eastern Europe, and it also moved east into North America. So that if it moved west, it reached the Slavs, and then the Slavs very likely combined this, adapted it in their own traditions, and combined it with a dualistic narrative of competition between God and the devil, or perhaps two other characters who then sort of got the Christian names of God and the devil. All right, next slide, please. There are a number of explanations have been put forward. People have asked, where did this dualism and the Slavic narratives come from? And a number of different ideas have been suggested. There might have been a dualistic outlook already in the pagan religion of the Slavs. It might reflect the social organization of the past and simple societies where people organize themselves into two separate groups. The dualism might have come from other religions or religious sects in ancient Iran, the ancient Near East, or in other times in Armenia, which all had a dualistic outlook. And closest, maybe in space and time to the Slavs, the closest source might be the Bogomil sect. This was a heretical religious movement which originated in Bulgaria and spread to Serbia, Bosnia, and other places, and lasted sort of from the 10th to the 15th centuries. The Bogomils had a dualistic view of the world, that the material world was created by the devil, and the spiritual aspects of the world were created by God. And so it's very possible that there was some influence of Bogomilism. Certainly there has been in Slavic folklore, but whether there was influence on these particular narratives is a matter of debate. A number of scholars have pointed out that there are a number of ways in which the narratives that we're looking at, the folk narratives, don't really match up with Bogomil teachings and beliefs. There's no Bogomil writings that have the diving motif or the image of Satan as a bird. According to the Bogomil teachings, the devil is the creator of the visible world. God does not participate, but in these folk narratives, both God and the devil create the visible world. The devil in these folk narratives is often kind of a little bit ridiculous or pathetic character. He's not really able to create what he wants to create, and that is different from the Bogomil view. And I would also add that, of course, God, as he appears in these narratives, is not the standard Christian God. He's not an omniscient, omnipotent God who can do everything. He has to rely on the devil or on the hedgehog, or has to get help from someone else. Also, the Bogomils, they rejected the symbolism of the cross. They didn't use the symbolism. And of course, making the sign of the cross is important in some of these narratives when the devil sort of inadvertently makes the sign of the cross and blesses the earth. So the influence of Bogomilism is one of many unanswered questions about these narratives. And as I've suggested, I think the scholarship on this subject has often focused on the search for origins. Where did this come from? What was the original version? But I think there are other questions we can also ask. I've mentioned that the question of tradition boundaries. Why does the Earth Diver myth stop where it does? Why do we have this interesting situation of the Christmas carol ritual song in a smaller area? And also, what do these narratives mean for the people who perform them, the people who listen to them, or what did they mean in the past? And it seems possible that at some point in the past, these narratives were taken seriously, as William Bascom says, a serious account of the origin of the world, but over time, perhaps their attitude towards them changed, and they could have become more humorous. As certainly many of the narratives that were recorded in the 19th century seem to be rather humorous. I think it's interesting that something like the Bogomil heresy was eventually put out and it just stamped out and disappeared, but a certain element of dualism has survived in folklore. And perhaps one of the appeals of these narratives is that they do, if you sort of think, well, maybe the devil was involved in the creation of our world, that certainly would explain a thing or two, right? Our world is certainly imperfect. There are many problems. And that would be a better that might explain those. So anyway, I think these are interesting narratives. I think they are a beautiful part of the cultural inheritance of the Slavic and Eastern European peoples. And they're also if you're just interested in folklore and traditional narratives, I think they're a very interesting case study. On the last slide, if you want to read more about this subject, I just have a number of some English language sources you can look at, articles. As you might suspect, much of the writing on this subject is not in English, but there are some English sources here. Most of what I presented today is an article that was published now already 20 years ago. But of course, scholarship keeps moving, and there's interesting research that's been published in the meantime. So I'll leave it there, and thank you for listening.
Okay, of course, I was muted. So again, thank you. And for those who are interested in having the list of resources that Dr. Jones provided, there will be a summary of the presentation published on the center website, and that summary will have those resources also. We have only 5 minutes left to our time, but if I may ask you a question related to what you just said. I'm a very visual person, and whenever I hear the stories, there's always that moment when is the story visible in any type of ornamentations, in any art forms that they may have been preserved in Slavic lands by Slavs?
Not that I know of. I mean, there's certainly art, and I'm not aware of any of the dualistic narratives appearing in Slavic artwork. In one of the sources that I in the bibliography is a scholar I just now became aware of. I did not know of her, Florentina Vadalanova, who's published a great deal about folklore, Slavic folklore and religion, and the relationship between the Bible and Apocrypha and Slavic oral tradition. And one of her articles that I have there's illustrations of icon paintings and church decorations. But I think all of the illustrations are of other subjects, Adam and Eve, or other subjects, but none of the diving bird, and I'm not aware of any illustrations, for example, or of the Christmas Carol, the birds and the trees in the primeval ocean. So I'm not aware of a iconographic or artwork. It may be there. I'm not aware of it.
I mean, when you mentioned the Christmas carols, the only thing that I remember from the Polish Christmas caroling traditions is there were some characters that were repeated by all the carolers, and the symbol of the sun. That's something that always exists. There's always color red that is carried by carolers, and there is a character of an animal that it's often associated with the devil or with some kind of spirit that it's not helpful to humans.
I think that's also found in many of those elements are found in other European caroling traditions. I know, and certainly in the like German-speaking countries, or Alpine regions, there's a devil character, but I don't know if these are really associated with have any connection to the carols we were looking at in this talk. I think the red color is certainly I'm just thinking of in Slavic languages, for example, red is at least usually in Russian, for example, the word for the red, the word for red is related to the word for beauty. So perhaps it's just the idea of beauty and vitality. And certainly the symbol of the sun also, I think, is probably something that has some other source. I don't think that symbol is specifically related to the themes that I was mentioning, the idea of the ancestors, or the idea of trying to create a beautiful new world for the people that we were visiting and singing carols for.
There is a question from the audience about, you mentioned that the Catholic Church may have been responsible for suppressing the diverse myth in the Western Slavic territories. What is the relation of the Eastern Orthodox Church, or do you know about if do they have position on those?
I know. Certainly the Orthodox churches, they have certainly in the past have made prohibitions or you say punished people, for example, for casting spells. You know, that was that people have gotten in trouble with the Orthodox Church for casting spells. I don't know whether this was ever. I honestly don't know whether this was just sort of ignored, or whether this was just stories people told, you know, away from the church. It is very interesting because there's certainly a difference between kind of the official Christianity and the official Orthodox Christianity, and then the sort of, I don't know, folk religion, folk Christianity. The understanding of God and the devil seems to be very different than it is for the official. I really don't know enough to say, I'm afraid.
But there is that duality, and definitely how the earth is, it will sort of make sense to have that duality.
Yes.
So
yeah, and I think the other thing I would say is that I think that there's the folk narratives. There's a way, and also in a way in which they're different from religion or from, for example, Bogomil teachings. We're very far from official, you know, and in a way very far from the biblical ideas. That this narrative is very. I think it's the narratives that are it's interested in the world that we can sort of see and touch and smell and taste and hold, things that you can see, like that are very material and concrete. Like the devil has this, receipt for human souls, and he actually has it in the pocket of his shirt, and wait, I left, it's almost like a date, like a situation we can imagine. Oh, I left my checkbook at home and I need it, or something like that. Like he realizes, I left this receipt for human souls. I need to rush up back to the surface of the sea. I think that it reflects a different, very interest in the tactile interest in the world that we can see right in front of us and see and hold. And that is different from, the you could say the vision in like the book of Genesis, or even in the Apocrypha.
Yes, definitely. That that makes a difference. That everydayness of those stories. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Jones. Our bells rang again. That means it's 1 o'clock, and that means the time for us is over. There are other questions, so if I may send you those, and maybe you can respond to them, and I can forward the questions to our speakers. But before we say goodbye for today, I would like to invite everybody. So first of all, thank you, Dr. Jones, for speaking to us, explaining how Slavs saw the beginning of our existence and the world we are walking. And I would like to invite everybody to our next webinar on February 11, and we'll be talking about the demons among the Southern Slavs. Our webinar will be also at noon, and we are already circulating the posters with the QR code to get the Zoom link to participate in the webinar. So again, thank you. Please remember to complete the survey that you are going to receive from us. And I hope to have you all back on February 11th. Bye-bye now.